Chapter 16, Secondary Dominant Seventh Chords. You may recall that dominant seventh chords are used to create strong motion back to tonic. The secondary dominant chords introduced in this chapter have a similar function, but they are used to create strong motion to other diatonic chords by involving chromatically altered pitches. As covered in Chapter 12, dominant seventh chords are built on the fifth scale degree and are major triads with the addition of a minor seventh interval, called major minor seven chords. There are several structural aspects of a chord built in this way that make it particularly effective as a means of pulling the music back to tonic. Firstly, the root tone motion drops a fifth, and this is inherent in the overtone series. Second, the dissonant tritone between the chord tone third and the chord tone seventh creates a certain instability that yearns for resolution. Thirdly, one of the elements of the tritone is the leading tone. This leading tone can resolve to the root tone of the tonic triad by moving only a half step higher. And fourthly, the other element of the tritone is the chord tone seventh. This seventh can resolve to the third of the tonic chord by moving stepwise down. Now, keeping these characteristics in mind, it is possible to build a dominant seventh chord that leads to a diatonic chord other than tonic in an equally effective way. When we build such a chord, we call it a secondary dominant. For example, we may wish to build a chord that could lead to a five chord in a very strong way. If we want the chord to have all the voice leading strengths mentioned above, we must build it on a root tone that is a perfect fifth above the chord we are leading to, and we must build it so that it is major minor seven in quality. In this next example, we are in the key of C, and we wish to build a secondary dominant chord that will lead to the five chord, the G chord, in a very strong way. To do this, we will start on a root tone a perfect fifth higher, on the D, and then build the chord so that it is major minor seven in structure. Notice that building a major minor seven chord on D necessitates the use of an F sharp. In fact, building a secondary chord almost always requires the use of some chromaticism. That is, at least one pitch that needs an accidental. This next example shows a short progression to illustrate the voice leading of this chord. As you can see, the chord tone seventh resolves downward, just as it does in a dominant chord. Also, the third of the chord is called a secondary leading tone because it can resolve a half step up to the root tone of the following chord. The notation is 5-7 of 5, and it indicates that we have created a secondary dominant seventh chord that leads to the five chord. Remember that when writing secondary dominants, the voice leading is the same as with dominant seventh chords. You must resolve the seventh stepwise and downward. But the secondary leading tone resolution can either be strict, up a minor second, or free, down a third, if it is in an inner voice. Also, you may omit the fifth of the secondary dominant, as illustrated in the example. Or you may omit the fifth of the chord of resolution. The following is an example of secondary dominant chords written by J.S. Bach. In this example, the second chord in measure 1 illustrates the same chord and voice leading as we saw in the previous example. Additionally, the chord on measure 1, beat 4, introduces an additional chromatic pitch, B flat. This chord adheres to all of the same characteristics of a secondary dominant seventh chord as described above. It is major minor 7 in quality. It is built on a root tone a perfect fifth higher than the following root tone. And the chord tone 7th resolves a step down. For this reason, it is labeled as 5/7 of 4 to indicate that it is functioning as a secondary dominant of the following 4 chord. Okay, at this time we're going to try the Check Your Understanding 16.1, where we have a couple of examples where we have to write secondary dominant chords. So let's see how we would do this. This says 5/7 of 5 going to 5. So here's our 5 chord in the key of E flat, right? B flat, D, and F. I'm going to use this little area here as a little scratch area to figure this out. So to write a secondary dominant, I need to find a chord that has a pitch a fifth higher than what I'm going to. So I'm going to the 5 chord, the B flat chord, I count up a fifth, and I'm going to build my chord on an F. So that's the first thing, is that the secondary dominant is going to resolve a fifth down to whatever chord you're going to. I'm going to actually place it over here. I'm just using this as a little scratch area. Then I need to make it a major minor 7 chord. So that means it's got to be a major triad. So this would have to be F, A natural, C. Notice I have to add the natural to make it a major triad. And then the minor 7th above F. And the minor 7th interval above F is an E flat. Okay, E natural would be a major 7, E flat would be the minor 7. So those are my notes. F, A, C, and E flat. So the first thing here I will place will be the bass. Now remember, when I write the secondary dominant, I've got a few options. I don't have to have all of the notes of the chord. I can leave out the 5th if I'd like, which I may opt to do here actually, because A is what we would call the secondary leading tone, because it leads to the B flat. And remember, it's A natural, because the key signature is A flat. The 7th of the chord is E flat, and that needs to resolve downward, so it looks like that would be a good place for the E flat. I'll put it there. And I don't really have much space for a C, so I'm going to go ahead and double the root and leave the C out. And that's just fine. It is possible to write secondary dominant chords that lead to any diatonic triad that is major or minor, because the effect of a secondary dominant is to create a tonicization. That is a brief implication of the following chord functioning as a temporary tonic. We would never use a secondary dominant to lead to a diminished triad. And that is because there is no such thing as a diminished key. Hence, the diminished chord cannot be heard as a temporary tonic. This example presents a sequence of secondary dominants that lead to each major and minor diatonic triad in the key of C. Notice that for each secondary dominant, the 7th scale degree has been resolved stepwise downward. Also notice that when you write a secondary dominant chord, you will always produce a secondary leading tone. That is, a pitch that has a tendency to lead up a half step to the root of the following chord. When written in an inner voice, these secondary leading tones can either resolve strictly, a half step up, or freely, a third down. In this example, they resolve strictly, and each 7th chord has the 5th of the chord omitted. Now I'm going to write the beginning of a similar sequence, but this time in the key of F. So I put the key signature of F, and I'll start with a 1 chord here. I'm going to just do the beginning of the sequence starting with a 1 chord and heading toward a 2 chord, which will look like this. That's G, B flat, and D. And then I'll head toward a 3 chord, which will look like this: A, C, and E. So to strengthen the approach to the 2 chord, what we want is a root tone a fifth higher, so that it can be a 5/7 of 2. We're going to approach each of these chords with secondary dominants. So the root tone of the 5/7 of 2 is a note a perfect fifth higher. But once you find that note, you also can place it a perfect fourth lower. It's the same either way. Remember, in music, approaching something by a fifth higher is the same as approaching it by a fourth lower. So place the D wherever it seems to work out best in the voice leading. Now we need to make this a major minor 7 chord up above a D. So that would be D, F sharp, A. That's the major triad. And now the minor 7th above that is C. First, I'll find a good place for the C, since that's the 7th and it has to resolve stepwise down. I'll put it here. Then I'll find a good place for the secondary leading tone, which is the F sharp. I'll put it here since it can lead up to the root tone of the next chord by half step. And as I've been doing often here, I'm going to leave out the 5th because the voice leading seems to work best like that here with a doubled root. Next, I'm going to go to the 3 chord, and again, I'm going to approach that with a secondary dominant, a 5/7 of 3. Notice that a 5/7 of 2 goes to a 2 chord, and a 5/7 of 3 goes to a 3 chord. Now the 3 chord here in this key is A minor. The 5/7 would be a fifth higher, so that it can resolve, of course, a fifth going lower. But again, I'm going to put it down here, a fourth lower, since it seems to be better for my bass. Now I'm going to build this chord as a major minor 7 chord. First, the major triad above E, that's E, G sharp, and B. And I'm going to need an accidental on that B, because the key signature has a B flat. So we have to put a natural on it. And now for the minor 7th above E, that's a D. And first I'll place that 7th. I need to place it where it can resolve stepwise down. Then I'll place the secondary leading tone, G sharp. By the way, this is also a good rule of voice leading that when you introduce an accidental, like a G sharp, it's best to introduce it in the same voice as where the G was, so that the G becomes a G sharp. If you don't do this, for instance, if you introduce the G sharp in a different voice than where the G was, it's called a cross relation. And that can be somewhat confusing to the ear. Now, I actually don't have a really good place for the B, so I'll leave it out. I can leave out the 5th. I don't need to worry about the B natural. Instead, I'll double the bass pitch, E. So keep in mind that with secondary dominants that you may see them or you may have to write them in inversions, not just always in root position. So notice here that I've got some examples where I'm going to be writing secondary dominants in first inversion, 6/5, second inversion, 4/3, and third inversion, 2. The good thing about it, it's just like dominant chords, is that everything works beautifully. The voice leading actually works better when you do it this way. So with this chord, you're going to be able to write complete chords on both chords. You're going to be able to let the 7th go down by step, and you're going to let the leading tone go up by step. So all these things will work out. So the first thing we're going to do here in the key of F sharp minor is we'll write the 4 chord. And that's B, D, F sharp. And then we'll figure out what the 5/7, or in this case the 5/6/5 of 4 is. Again, we just count up the interval of the 5th to get that root pitch, which is F sharp. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put that on a piece of scrap paper just so that I don't get confused. So I've counted up the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, F sharp, and I'm going to build a major minor 7 chord. So there's my major triad, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and here is my minor 7th, E. So the first thing I'll do is get my bass pitch. Of course, 6/5 means that it's the 3rd that's going in the bass. In this case, that would be A sharp. Make sure to put the accidental when you need it. And then we'll go ahead and try to get the 7th of the chord in the right place. That one is going down by a step, so this would be a good place for it. We'll put it right there. Let's go ahead and get the root of the chord. That's F sharp, and I can see a common tone there, so I'll put that in the soprano. And then the missing note is C sharp, which looks like it goes very well in the tenor. So I've got all the notes of the chord here, all the notes of the chord here. I've got my leading tone in an outer voice resolving up, and I've got my seventh of the chord resolving down. Beautiful. Next, I've got the key of A flat. This is going to be a second inversion chord going to the sixth chord. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and write the sixth chord in this key, which would be an F minor chord. I'll put it here. That's F, A flat, C, and of course I'll double the bass. So the 4-3, well, first of all, let's figure out what is the secondary dominant of F. We'll count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that is a C. Again, I'll put that on my scrap paper, the C, and I'll make a major minor 7 chord, which is going to be pretty easy. C, E, G, and B flat. Just make sure now when you transfer this chord into this key signature that the E will have to be E natural, because you figured out the notes here. They have to stay true even with that key signature. You have to add accidentals. So the first thing we'll do here is let's get the right bass pitch. The bass pitch, since it's 4-3, it would be a G. So we can put the G here. Next, let's get the seventh of the chord, B flat, and it looks like a B flat would go very well here because it can resolve downward. Let's go ahead and get the root, which is C. This looks like a good place here in the tenor. And the pitch that's missing is E, the secondary leading tone. We'll put that here. And of course, don't forget that we need to raise the leading tone on that one. And finally, the last example in the key of D minor, we're going to go to a 4 chord in that key. So let's go ahead and at least think about what the notes are of the 4 chord. G, B flat, and D. I'm hesitating a little bit here because I'm going to show you something on this chord. So in the key of D minor, the 4 chord is G, B flat, and D. So the secondary dominant of that, again, we count up a fifth. And we're going to have to build a chord on D, F sharp, A, and C. D, F sharp, A, and C. That's my 5-7 chord. But because it's in third inversion, it's the C that's going in the bass. That's the seventh of the chord. Whenever you have a seventh of the chord, it wants to resolve down. So think about that. That C is going to have to resolve down, in this case, to B flat. So whenever you use this inversion of a seventh chord, it's going to have to resolve to an inversion of this chord. Notice that by putting the B flat in the bass here, you are in first inversion. That's always going to be the case when you precede it by that inversion. So that's why I wanted to hesitate a little bit before I wrote in what this chord is going to be. I wanted to show you that would be first inversion. Let's go ahead now and voice that 4 chord, and then we can come in and finish this. We need a leading tone, which is F sharp, and I think this would be a good place for it in the soprano. We need the root of the chord D. Seems like it fits there. And we need the A. And there you go. At this time, I think we are ready to take a look at an analysis of an excerpt of this piano piece by Schumann. Now, there really are a lot of secondary dominant chords in this piano sonata movement by Schumann, and you really should look at all of them. But we're going to just look at one of them, and it's in measure 6 toward the end. First of all, look at all those C sharps there. Here's the first sign that you've got a chromatic chord, chromatic pitches. So when we see chromatic pitches like that, we want to analyze the structure of that chord. Remember, a secondary dominant has the structure major, minor, 7. So if those pitches are of the structure major, minor, 7, and it's a chromatic chord, then good chance that it's a secondary dominant chord. So let's take a look. The pitches here are A, C sharp, E, and G. Sure enough, a secondary dominant chord. And this would be a 5-7 chord of D minor. In other words, a chord that is built a perfect fifth above D minor. And lo and behold, in measure 7, the chord is a D minor chord. That's the 6th chord in the key of F. So we call it 5-7 of 6. In this case, because the C sharp is the lowest pitch, it's in first inversion. So we'll actually label it 5-6-5 of 6.